Let's do a sound check from the computer. All right, so hello everybody. My name is Palo. That was a quick slideshow of my work as Molleindustria. I'm gonna talk a little bit about Unmanned, which is a project I made in collaboration with Jim Munroe here. Unmanned is a short narrative game about a day in the life of a drone pilot. So a couple of things about me before, like in case you're wondering why an Italian art teacher makes a game about this kind of obscure topic. Well, that's where I live. That's where I teach. That's actually my school, Carnegie Mellon University. That's the Department of Fine Art. Yeah, like if you go down that street, you'll stumble upon the Robotic Institute, which is the Department of Robotics at Carnegie Mellon University. Obviously, they make robots there. They make robots of all sorts. Some robots are cute, like some other are a little freaky, like this one. You might have seen it on YouTube. We are in the age of military porn viral video. Some of them are kind of scary, like this is called the Crusher. The new version also has a gun on the top of it. And they are all pretty much funded by the US military. They are DARPA and or military, This is, by the way, it's a flying Humvee. Kind of like an helicopter flying a Humvee without a pilot, like just like an SUV without a pilot that flies. Like, what can possibly go wrong with that? So if you go down the riverside, you'll probably end up in this in this technology district, and there is this building which is the ETC that people in this community might know for. ETC is the Entertainment Technology Center. People in this community might know for certain projects such as the experimental gameplay project that generated World of Goo, for example, and other like very interesting project, or more recently Way by Chris Bell, who was an alum there. And that's how the ETC looks inside. That's also part of Carnegie Mellon. It's like the grad department, the kind of like the graduate studies department has like a full spaceship with a drone sound. There are like also robots, but this time they are like kind of like fictional robots. Those ones. And they make all sorts of things. Not just video games, but they make educational games, educational software, experimental interfaces, and military stuff. Like here, I just grabbed a handful of Depliant, and that's what they kind of do. Like the students there, child care sort of software, educational software. A contract for like Northrop Grumman project about the stealth bomber, not just a game about not a game about the stealth bomber. Actually, technology for that. There is a nice one called Panoptics, surveillance, and stuff. So it's there's this there's a kind of interesting mix that is not that weird or unusual if you're familiar with like that kind of scene in North American university. There is even a name for that, the military entertainment complex, that's sort of reminiscent of the military industrial complex. Anyway, so on a personal level, I kind of had to deal with this. I've been a U.S. taxpayer for a few years now, and it's part of my income basically comes from that industry, the kind of like from the business of killing people. And I think we are sort of witnessing a kind of like interesting phase right now in which you have on one side a process like that, basically a process of separation that basically people like normal people, civilians, are sort of separated from the reality of war through secrecy and through technological mediation. Technological mediation such as drone warfare or guided missiles and things like that, smart bombs. And on the other side, you have a kind of like we are flooded by representation of war in pop culture and entertainment. And this representation of war are generally stylized and romanticized and made exciting. So Unmanned is a little bit about this process. On one side, the secrecy and separation. On the other side, kind of like permeation of images of that kind. So another, like, just a recap. 2 years ago, I was here to present this little game in which you are this stereotypical white-collar, one-dimensional man that sort of stuck in the same routine, the same commute every day. It's called Every Day the Same Dream. And I don't know, like it's kind of like an absurdly slow game, kind of depressing. It demands a lot of attention and devotion from the player. But I was surprised that people actually enjoyed it. Like a lot of people were genuinely moved and particularly intrigued by this thing that I thought was like just like extremely boring. There are also like I keep receiving kind of embarrassing emails by people who want to make mostly movies or like fan art, like especially it's popular in I guess film students. But there's also a guy who made a rap song here. I don't know. It's weird. It's kind of like a literal re-narration of the game in a rap form. Anyway, so I was surprised by the reaction, and I thought that probably opened some opportunities, some perspective. I was like, oh, really? Like, so you like boring games? I'm gonna make you a really boring one. That's why it's kind of like slow, you know. But it's obviously it's not just a matter of like making it boring for the sake of abusing players, but it's kind of like an aesthetical choice. There is a question that I'm trying to answer, a kind of a tricky question. That is basically, how can you possibly make a video game about war when real war is already kind of very similar to game aesthetics. Like on a visual sense, here you have a comparison. Some of this footage is real, and some other is from a game, so that different kind of games. So you have this like kind of like visual short circuit, I guess. And also on an experiential level, like like the whole premise of the drone warfare is that you can do that without risking, without personal risk, which is kind of like the thing we like about games. So you can die over and over, Anyway, so that's something that also has some relationship between like film language. Like once there's this famous quote by French director François Truffaut that was basically saying there's no such a thing as an anti-war film, an anti-war movie, because it was saying basically that no matter what the message of this movie is, like there is a level of fascination that comes from cinema as a form that inevitably take the viewer aside, basically inhibit the critical thinking of the viewer. So like it's the case of several anti-war movies, supposedly anti-war movie like Full Metal Jacket, that are also like very appreciated by warmongers and militarists of all kinds. So it's kind of like the magic of cinema is so like viscerally challenging and interesting that always makes the action look exciting. So I guess François Truffaut's solution for this problem was to make movies about love, essentially. But I think that for us, like the problem might even be more, even bigger for games, which are even more centered on the action and even more centered on this, let's say, fascination with agency and kind of like breaking up things and doing things in space. So one of my first attempts a few years ago, I made this machinima video that now you cannot really see that well. But that was a kind of like an attempt to diffuse this fascination with action. So this is kind of like a machinima video called Welcome to the Desert of the Real. That was filmed in America's Army, which is this first-person shooter produced by the U.S. military for training and, well, not really training, but for PR purposes, essentially, for recruiting purposes. And it's kind of like, I don't know, kind of like, imagine sort of Gus Van Sant-ish like narrative here, juxtaposed with snippets from the post-traumatic stress disorder self-evaluation questionnaire. So kind of like this questions that are asking to veterans to sort of self-diagnose post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, to me, just obviously, if you are familiar with America's Army, that's not how it looks. It's not that contemplative and that beautiful. It's just like a very fast-paced kind of shooter, right? So I wanted to diffuse the action with a sort of like contemplation and introspection in a way, so that the desert becomes not just a battlefield, but a more like internal, I guess, scenario. Anyway, the full version is online. It's like about 7 minutes long. So, all right, back to Unmanned. The game employs this two channel setup. The screen is always split like symmetrically. It's kind of like a formal solution to kind of like highlight the disconnection of the character. You know, you're always in two spaces in the same times. Like, you know, like this guy living in the suburbs of Las Vegas, and every day he just basically goes to work, and he controls something that is in Pakistan, essentially. So like this theme of disconnection runs through the whole game. Even when you go back home and you play with your kid, there is like kind of like this struggle, this dissociation that you have with your kid. And so you always have this kind of like you have to split your attention, because you also have two gameplays at the same time most of the time. So you have to kind of decide what to prioritize, even if you want to kind of like you basically shoot at Nazis on that video game, or have a meaningful conversation with your kid. So it's kind of like a multitasking. That the idea is kind of like like we have a fancy word in game design. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's called like ludonarrative dissonance. That's when you have kind of like a gameplay that conflicts with the narrative plot. And that's something that people have noted for games, for example, like BioShock, in which you have, you have this deep and kind of complex story about kind of like the failure of individualism and kind of like genetic enhancement. You are visiting this kind of like alternate universe in which kind of like the humanity is definitely like collapsing. And then, but then the game itself is kind of like a standard shooter kind of thing, and you have to improve yourself, and you are kind of like this single action hero. Basically, you keep shooting, and that's a kind of like a dissonance. Like the gameplay doesn't reinforce the story, or vice versa. But yeah, I thought that maybe like there is a kind of a ludonarrative dissonance in our lives as well, in the sense that maybe our stories are, kind of like conflicting with the kind of actions we take. And so like I thought that maybe it can be a good like theme for a game. Anyway, so that's another scene. There is this. It's kind of like a twist on the dating sim genre, in which that's where you finally get to work, and you can basically have a small talk or actually meaningful talk with your co-pilot. You are actually the co-pilot with your colleague here, while you are performing a mission, a sort of like stalking mission, and looking for a potential terrorist, a suspected terrorist. And you can end up flirting with her while you're doing this, so that you have kind of mirror situation in which you are kind of following and doing reconnaissance with around that guy, the suspected target, and at the same time you're sort of like doing reconnaissance in her little, like sentimental world or things like that. And then when you attack, you can essentially, hit on her. So that's when you have to, like, then your wife calls you and so on. Anyway, yeah. So the idea is a little bit to disrupt this kind of like this. To prevent the player from being single-mindedly focused on one specific action, which is something that like a lot of game developers usually praise and look for. Like you want your player to be like so absorbed in your little game, or like so addicted, or even like so like kind of in the zone. And I think Unmanned tries always to push you back and forth between those two situations, like forces you to always like exert like this some kind of actions and some kind of verbal function here, because you generally have a very fairly trivial action on one side and a more like a language, introspection, dialogue on the other. So that's kind of like the dualism between action and communication, I guess. So, yeah, I guess one of my main concern and our main concern with Unmanned was to experiment with a different kind of choice, different from the typical choices that games give you or like pose you. Like usually games pose you, a very overtly stated problem. You have a very clear goal, and the solution for this problem is usually, there is a solution, but there is a very simple goal. And actually, Unmanned has goals here. Like there are some clearly stated goal represented by medals, but it's more like they're more like an ironic take on gamification. I don't know if you ever heard of it. There's external motivators. There was this famous talk by Jesse Shell, which actually works in my same school, that he was basically imagining this world in which you get points for like brushing your teeth or doing things like that, and the marketers kind of took him literally, and they are sort of trying to apply these gamification principles. Anyway, like Unmanned is a little bit like playing with that, and since it's kind of like about game culture, about kind of like seeing your life as a game, you have this kind of rewards, achievements that you get for like very stupid things, like for thinking certain things or for shaving perfectly. There are kind of like medals that are appropriate for this kind of pathetic hero of the 21st century. So anyway. Games usually pose you a problem, and in most of games, the way to solve that problem, not the one we just saw, the presentation, that's more like a puzzle game, but let's say action-oriented games usually that essentially ask you to move in space and to go from point A to point B, avoiding obstacles, shooting people or solving certain mechanism. And, like that's... I guess the epitome of this kind of game is GTA, which kind of like the story part is almost like basically a cutscene. You don't really intervene in that. What you do in GTA is essentially keep like moving from one point to another, and just like performing simple actions while you keep going from point A to point B. Even a lot of art games are actually kind of about that, traversing spaces. Like the critically acclaimed and commercially acclaimed Dear Esther, which I actually like, but it also involves essentially moving through the space and staring at polygons, and they just kind of like remove the shooting part and they put a more interesting narrative, a more like open-ended narrative. Anyway, guess what? Like for once, I didn't want to have a player like in charge of controlling a dude moving in space. So like there is some movement in space, but it's kind of ironic. Like you cannot really go anywhere. That's you're driving a car, but you kind of can't just go straight, and you can possibly go off road. Because I don't know. I was thinking that in my life, I don't know yours, but in my life I probably spent like 1% of my time walking, biking, or like driving, and the rest. And when I'm walking or some kind of public transportation, I'm usually like kind of bored, or like I'm immersed in my thought, or maybe I'm projected to my destination. So it was like, so what's the deal with these games that are always asking you to move in space? So basically, in Unmanned, instead of wandering around and staring at polygons, you are kind of wandering in the subconscious of this character. So like you're still exploring a space, but it's not obviously a Cartesian space. So and you can also participate in the development of the character, which is to me that's the kind of like different kind of choice that you can do. Like you have, let's see. Yeah, like you have different choices, and you basically are in charge of deciding what kind of person is this person. It's kind of like almost a blank slate, and you can decide if it's going to be kind of like a depressed commuter, or a kind of like a jingoist, stereotypical Air Force jock, or you can decide. You can define it as a good father or a bad father, and so on and so on. To me, it's kind of like that's what I wanted it to be. To me, it's a kind of like an exercise in speculation. Like I think the CIA and the Army created these major black holes in our consciousness. They created, this sort of like deniable classified programs, like the rendition programs, or the various undeclared wars that are fought through drones, and they are sort of like created this dark world, as the CIA community call it, the dark world or black world, that is sort of defying any public debate. And so like we are in this weird situation in which we know exactly what's the speed and the range of a Hellfire missile, but we don't really know exactly what's going on in these missions. We don't know like the chain of command that is required for this sort of engagement. We don't even know exactly how many officials, how many civilians we kill using these technologies, essentially. So I think we kind of have to imagine exactly what's going on in this world, and we have to imagine what's going on in their heads. We kind of have to imagine how do they sleep at night, essentially. And that's where, to me, artists can have a role in sort of speculating of what's going on in this black world. And that's pretty much what Unmanned is about. That's it. Thank you very much.
Awesome, guys.
If you have questions.
I have a question for both of you, both you and Jim. So in y'all's observations of how people have played the game, you have these choices, like what type of person is our main character. What have you found that people tend to do? Is there a clear majority answer where people always want to make him a jerk, or always want to make him a sad sack, or what have you found?
You have an idea? I have no idea. I had people frustrated. Oh yeah, like all the choices I have are kind of lame, especially like when dealing with your wife. There's no way to, because the character is a little bit formed. It's not complete. Like you don't have a complete agency. We were not interested in giving you the most likely and the most open branching possibilities. So some people are frustrated by the lack of choices, but I don't know what they tend to do.
Yeah, you can't really choose the hair color or shape of nose or anything like that for this guy. But in general, I think people, when I see people, often they play mean first. I think because it's like, that's kind of what games kind of train us to do is to do something that provokes the biggest reaction. Like if you're given a flower or a bazooka, you choose the bazooka. Sure. So just because that's kind of a Pavlovian kind of response at this point for gamers. So I mean, it's interesting for me that people will go through that and almost on a button pushing level, just sort of choose that, and then, but often they'll play again and they're curious to see what the different responses are when they choose more nuanced kind of responses.
without spoiling too much, is there anything that y'all are especially proud of that happens in one of the storylines that you want to talk about?
I don't know. There are. I think every time you play, you're kind of exposed to probably about like 30% of the text content, more or less. So like, the structure is linear, really, but there is a lot of content that you don't see if you, especially like if you do like kind of like the stupid guy, you know, like or the more like superficial sort of approach. I think there is a for example like a branch of a possible conversation that can happen with your colleagues that is essentially explaining the whole medals as reward thing, which I didn't really mention, and it's kind of like at least like what we were kind of imagining is, you know, one interesting problem in working in a secret mission in classified programs is that nobody will essentially reward you with a medal. I mean, there are medals, but they are not really official, and so they are called jockstrap medals, because you are supposed to put, you know, like to put in your, you know, in your underpants. So like, and that's a kind of like a source of frustration sometimes within pilots working in that, because they do like very like interesting or like from their perspective very like interesting accomplishments, but they are not allowed to tell anybody. And so those medals are kind of like the medals that they have to invent for themselves, because they cannot even talk with their families essentially.
I have seen people that have been pretty disappointed when they haven't won any medals, which is to me like, I mean, yeah, I mean that's and I think that again that's a Pavlovian thing, which I don't think we expected people to be like, oh, I'm not doing very good at this game. I'm really sucking at this game. Like I've watched people play and they know that I had something to do with the game, and and they're sort of apologizing that they're so bad at it. Like this is not the
that
point.
occurred to me too. But it also has a functional, like, kind of structural choice. So, like, when the medals are there to signify, hey, it's not one of those art games so that you don't really have any meaningful choice, that you're kind of like fiddling around, but they basically have a main narrative, and that's it. Like, there are things that you are supposed to discover, and so they are kind of hopefully encouraging replayability.
Can you guys talk a little bit about how y'all work together? Like, what is the workload like for y'all's projects?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the first game I made that is so centered on writing and dialogue, and I just quickly discovered that I pretty much suck at dialogue, especially like you know due to the fact I'm not a native English speaker.
What?
Yeah, well, you figured it. Yeah, so like I asked for help, but it's I think what emerged was a more like organic relationship, and like I already had like a very defined way of this, like a very defined sort of narrative arc and the main branches. So like we both did to some extent some writing, but Jim also introduced some of the most interesting parts in the gameplay in general, and some of them like even like entire scenes. So like it's not like kind of like a developer visual programming versus writer relationship. I think there was an interesting back and forth.
Yeah. I mean, it was very interesting to me. I've developed my own games before. But they're mostly text adventure games, so it was really exciting to get to work with Palo, who's one of my favorite game makers, and also I felt like I got more of the credit than I put in terms of the time, because writing is pretty fast for me. I don't know, coding not so fast. So,
are there any questions from anyone in attendance here? Oh, that guy was just excited. You don't have a question for the creators of Unmanned. Just a show of hands. Be thinking. Hey, JW.
So I really like this game, but if I'm correct, you also worked on a game about the production of iPhones. Whatever happened with that? Like, how did that end up?
It ended up pretty well. He's referring to a game that I probably flashed it very briefly. A game called Phone Story that came out last year. Yeah, I guess that's the thing. So fun story. Like, what do you what do you want to know exactly? What the game is or what? Now it's playable online. It was basically a game for iPhone. My first foray into kind of mobile devices, and everybody kept asking me like, "Oh, why don't you make a game for iPhones or iPad?" And I was like, "All right, sit down a second. I'm gonna tell you what I think about this closed markets and this kind of devices." And that kind of a conversation kept coming up because people kind of just assume almost like technologically like deterministic in a deterministic kind of way that, oh yeah, there is a new platform, so like are you gonna take advantage of it? And I was like, I have my issues with this platform, and maybe I should just make a game about it. And that's the thing. So Foam Story is basically a series of like 4 mini games. I should check a video, but anyway, a series of 4 mini games that are sort of narrating the story, the production process behind a smartphone. So like especially the problematic aspect of this production. So you have the first level in which you have to control or manage a little coltan mine in Congo, which is a kind of like it's a conflict mineral. Think about like the conflict diamonds, but more like for electronic devices. And you have a second level in which you have to sort of like catch Chinese workers at Foxconn sort of jumping off the building because that was a big news at the time. Then you have like the last chapter is about kind of the getting rid of kind of like recycling electronic waste, which is another problem that doesn't really like we don't really discuss that much. Kind of like this eternal cycle of obsolescence has a very like negative impact because all like those electronics are extremely toxic, and what we generally do is we ship them to India or Bangladesh or China, in which they are basically recycled but disassembled in a very unsavory and unhealthy conditions. So the game is pretty much about that. You have a voice telling you. Originally it was meant to be the voice of Steve Jobs, but then the guy died. So the voice is like the voice of your phone telling you its story, essentially. Kind of like pushing you out of the fiction. You play as yourself, as a consumer with an iPhone in hand. That's why I wanted it to be on this particular device. It's not just a game about those devices. And yeah, it got banned and stuff.
Yeah, don't just write that off. That's awesome. How did it get? Like, what was the process? How angry were they?
Well, interestingly, like since there's nothing like particularly like I think the things that Apple is most concerned with is nudity and kind of some kind of maybe racial hate speech. That's kind of like tasteful, somewhat educational. There is a little bit of gore, but it's not that. It's fine. It was designed to be compliant with their guidelines. But then, like, after they sort of realized what kind of operation it was, after, like, basically, like, 3 or 4 hours from the approval, like, obviously people started to talk about it, and they were like, oh, yeah, maybe you should download this game because it's not going to be available for so long, for like, too much time. And so, like, Apple, like, decided to pull it from the market, which is fairly like not a very common thing they do, but sometimes happen. And well, if you're interested in the reasons, is it depicts violence or abuse of children. It presents excessively objectionable or crude content, and yeah, there's the donation thing, but that's very very questionable as well.
Yeah, it's objectionable to them. Because you're critical of them.
Yeah, like you can use this kind of weasel word, like objectionable. What does it mean? There was also an app that came out recently that actually like made me really mad, because this one was kind of like a provocation. It was meant to be a provocation, But there was another app that was basically tracking the drone kills. So there is an association of journalists, essentially independent journalists that are kind of like on the field in Pakistan, and they are saying, oh yeah, here an attack happened and 12 people died, and they put it in a database. So like a guy in New York, artist in New York, just made an application that takes this publicly available data and basically sends you push notification on your phone saying like, sort of real time when the data is added, you receive a push notification. But that was also pulled from the market. Wow. Because of objectionable yes. Or like it wasn't entertaining enough, and that's even like worse because it's just data really.
Huh. That's interesting. Show of hands if you have a question for Palo and Jim. All right.
I have a question for Jim. Could you characterize the difference between writing interactive fiction or text-only adventures with this kind of production?
Well, yeah, this is more a branching sort of narrative, and so it's a lot easier in some respects. A leads to B, and then you have two choices. And with interactive fiction, where it's sort of more world building and more like sometimes I've done some procedural stuff in interactive fiction. There's a lot more kind of writing you need to do to sort of compensate for various states and such. But I think this is one of the more overtly political works that I've done. I've done actually a lot more political work in other mediums and books and movies. But I was excited to get to write something that was I felt very strongly about politically and interested in exploring with a group of people, namely gamers, who I think are intelligent enough to deal with some of these issues. And but it just doesn't tend to come up much. So so that was really cool. And I've got a history of journalism as well, so it was nice to be able to sort of start with some source material like the Wired for War book that we read, and sort of look to adapt it into a sort of basically a character-based story, So, thanks.
What's the next thing on the horizon for you guys individually or collaboratively? What's the next game?
I cannot talk about it.
Oh, come on.
No.
We're all friends here.
Three possible projects that I'm not sure they're going to happen. So, no, sure. I swear.
What a tease.
I am...
That's classified.
I can tell you. It's not an official announcement, but I'm working with a programmer to make a kind of library, an extension library for processing that more like directed toward games, kind of game creation. I don't know if you're familiar with processing. Processing is a really neat educational kind of extension of Java. It's based on Java. Open source and with a very open community. It's really good if you are like a computational designer, if you're doing information visualization and things like that. It's pretty bad if you are making games because you don't have the typical components that you always use in games. So we are trying to create a little library. You can think about like some kind of Flixel thing for this environment that can also produce JavaScript, and so it can also be browsable, essentially. So kind of like a Flash alternative, possibly.
Could you even tell us what political thing is inspiring your secret projects? A hint. Because I'm sure it's something. No, you can't.
Go for it. Next.
What's my next thing? Well, I'm still touring Ghosts with Shit Jobs, which is my lo-fi sci-fi feature. And I'm going to finish working on a text adventure game for the interactive fiction competition at the end of the year. So I'm actually, or at the end of the month. I wish it was the end of the year. I'm actually going to have to go back pretty soon after this and keep working on it. But it's called Gilded Youth, and it's kind of It's kind of Goonies inspired, which is a pretty abrupt change from project, but it's Goonies inspired with for sort of BBS generation sort of types of people. So.
Were you guys going to be around the rest of the afternoon to hang out with us?
Yeah, I'll be around.
Great. Well, everybody, Unmanned is on all 20 of these Alienware laptops and also has its own devoted arcade cabinet. Be sure to spend some time with it today. And let's give a round of applause for Jim and Palo, creators of Unmanned. Thank you guys so much. That was an excellent talk.